No matter what I say here, someone's gonna get mad.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
That's right, we are ranking the albums of Metallica, and we're gonna start right at the beginning with Kill 'Em All in 1983. Very important foundational album for the genre, no debate about that point. Very thrash and rolly kind of sound though, with a sort of lighter, bouncier approach than what would come after, because obviously, like, they were sort of figuring out the blueprint. I do still think that people saying that the new material sounds anything like this are just completely delusional. Like, I can hear some of the similarities in the guitar work, but the overall aesthetic and modern polish just make them night and day. Regardless, great riffing and soloing in part thanks to Dave Mustaine. Whiplash, Metal Militia, and of course Seek and Destroy are great, and I dig Phantom Lord and No Remorse. Personally, there are a lot of thrash debuts I'd honestly choose over this one. In fact, I did a video ranking 80s thrash metal debuts, and some people were a little bit upset of this one's placement. But again, it's a classic, and within their own discography, it definitely gets an A. But then we have Ride the Lightning in 1984. What an absolute banger of a thrash record. Fight Fire with Fire is an incredible opener that is made for screaming along to with all your friends. This followed by the excellent title track and iconic For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is just Riff City. What an amazing hook on that one. Then we get their first power ballad in Fade to Black, closing out side 1, only to kick the adrenaline up again on side 2 with Trapped Under Ice. Then we get Escape and another legendary thrash track with Creeping Death, and putting a bow on the whole thing with the Call of Cthulhu instrumental. 8 tracks, 47 minutes, absolute perfection, one of my all-time favorite thrash metal albums. Overall, S tier. Alright, so how do you follow up an instant classic like that? You do it again, but different, with Master of Puppets in 1986. Another timeless opener with the super heavy battery, as if to say we haven't lost our edge, but then they follow that up with the nearly 9-minute title track showcasing an impressive step up in both technical performance and progressive songwriting. And that trend continues with The Thing That Should Not Be, and then once more closing out side 1 with a ballad, this time in Sanitarium. Then another lengthy solo-heavy shredder in Disposable Heroes, followed by the deeply infectious stomp of Leper Messiah. Moving into the Orion instrumental before finally closing with Damage Inc. Where Ride the Lightning is just a perfect but mostly straightforward thrash album, this is their crowning achievement as musicians, I would say. I still prefer Ride the Lightning a little bit more in terms of pacing as a start-to-finish listen, just something I go back to probably the most, but obviously this also has to go to S tier. Then we have And Justice for All in 1988. To begin with the dance of the dead, I will blacken. So this is the first album after Cliff's tragic death, and famously Jason Newsted's bass playing is almost completely drowned out, which is unfortunate. But even so, this is still a very impressive outing. Blacken seems like it's directly competing to see if they can top Battery from the last album. And of course, another excellent title track as usual, but the crown jewel here is definitely the deeply powerful One, which I remember even before I was a Metallica fan, that was the one song that I always enjoyed. Imprisoning me, all that I see, absolute horror, I cannot live. Still one of my all-time favorite songs, I think, and very fun to play on guitar. There's also Eye of the Beholder, Harvester of Sorrow, that awesome hook on To Live Is To Die. Being critical, I've never been a big fan of the frayed ends of Sanity, and this album also started the unfortunate trend of albums being over an hour, with the bloat starting to show just a little bit. Excellent stuff, but not quite as good as the two that came before, if you ask me. So this one is also going to A tier. Next up, the Black Album in 1991. You know it says Getting the obvious tracks out of the way first, look, Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, and Nothing Else Matters are classics for a reason, but frankly, I'm kind of sick of talking about them at this point. Of the singles, I do still enjoy probably banging my head the most to Sad But True and Wherever I May Roam. Of the other tracks, my thoughts are mixed. Holier Than Thou and Don't Tread On Me are solid foot tappers, but nothing to really write home about. Alternatively, Of Wolf and Man is more memorable with a real nice stomp to it and a great hook. Through the Never is still a groovy standout with guitars very similar to that of Pantera, who had actually just released Cowboys from Hell the year before and were in turn influenced by earlier works from Overkill. The God That Failed is another hypnotic head bobber with a similar energy as Sad But True, and My Friend of Misery feels like the more logical closer on this one, I would say. So not perfect, not an album I'm totally in love with, but again, I'd say within their own discography in terms of the albums I go back to the most, I think this one's also going to go at A tier because it just doesn't fit quite the same with some of these other albums we're going to get to. I would say it's on the lower end of A for me. But speaking of which, let's talk about Load in 1996. Now, I maintain that Ain't My Bitch is a super lame title, but goddamn is it fun to sing along to that chorus, and Until It Sleeps is a really catchy and well-constructed song. Hero of the Day has a nice, more uplifting energy to it that I've always appreciated, and that guitar hook always gets stuck in my head. But 2x4 is about as boring as its namesake, super generic rock song number 1354. The House Jack Built is okay, I guess, a little more atmosphere. Same kind of lukewarm thoughts on King Nothing as well. Bleeding Me gets dull about halfway through. Of all the albums, why does this one need to be 79 minutes? Like, there's barely enough here to justify a standard 45. Pretty much everything after that is more forgettable filler, though Wasting My Hate is at least passable. Not the worst thing ever, but really dull for much of the runtime. I'm putting this one at C tier. And then they followed that up just a year later with Reload in 1997.
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire. Ooh.
Thankfully, Fuel is exactly the injection I need after that slog. It's corny, a little stupid, but man, is this another fun opener. The Memory Remains and Devil's Dance make for more infectious groovers. We didn't really need an Unforgiven 2, but the parts with those driving guitars have always done something to get under my skin. But man, it's only been a year and we get another 76 minutes of music, which I know some people would be excited about, but for me, it's almost impossible that this also wouldn't turn into quantity over quality. More generic filler, Better Than You, Slither, Bad Seed, really everything up until Fixer ranges from meh to outright lame for me. I will say take the best songs from both of these albums and throw in I Disappear, make it a really tight 40-minute runtime, and you could have a real banger rock album on your hands. But as it stands, I think this is maybe even worse than Load. I'm still putting it at C tier, but lower down. But unfortunately, it only gets worse because we have Saint Anger in 2003.
I'm madly in anger with you. I'm madly in anger with you.
No.
Good God, the production on this album is beyond terrible. I sometimes forget just how bad it is, but every time I turn it on, I feel like I'm listening to a really shitty quality MP3 off of LimeWire, even in top quality. This is what happens when you try to be heavy, but don't put any effort into actual songwriting or post-production. Frantic already turns the lyrical stupid up to 11 with Frantic, tick, 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 tock. And of course, the legendary My Lifestyle Determines My Death Style, the first of many lines I'm sure they thought were so clever at the time. Now, there are honestly elements of the title track I kind of like, again, despite the horrendous production, but then the chorus hits and brings the almost grindy energy to a full stop.
You bust it out, you bust it out. You bust it out, you bust it out.
It's also, again, way too long. I just don't want to be highly in anger with you that bad, James. Dirty Window could be kind of fun too if Lars wasn't actively trying to beat my brains out of my skull. So much teenage angst in these lyrics, except written by men now in their 40s, and then when they bring in those out-of-time layered vocals on My World, I just start laughing. Not to mention this also famous bit of incredible lyricism.
Girl, 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 girl.
Stop it. Get some help.
It's honestly a bit of a shame because a lot of these riffs have potential, like way more so than most of Load or Reload, but they're in the shadow of so many other bad decisions that were made on this album. Another hour plus of complete torture This one's going to D tier.
I would say delete that.
Fortunately, they followed that up with Death Magnetic in 2008.
Like a siren in my head that always begs to repeat. Like a blind man that obstructs into the speeding driver's seat.
Now, don't get me wrong, this album also has production issues, but I don't find them to be nearly as distracting. That Was Just Your Life is a solid opener on the thrashier side. Love those little harmonized guitars. Likewise, The End of the Line is a fun and very energetic, chuggy follow-up. Some memorable, albeit simple, vocal hooks on this thing to get you screaming along.
Breaking your teeth on the hard life coming.
Then you've also got some slower moments like On the Day That Never Comes and Unforgiven 3 to make things more engaging from a dynamics perspective. Cyanide is a banger, and for the first time in a long time, there's actually not really a bad track on this entire album. The main issue is that, again, it's way longer than it needs to be. Cut like 20 to 30 minutes out of this, and it might even be an A, but I'd give this one kind of like a B+. Next up is Hardwired to Self-Destruct in 2016.
In the name of desperation. In the name of wretched pain.
Another solid opener here with Hardwired, and I know Mad Mike also greatly prefers the production on this album. More solid dual guitar moments like on Atlas Arise and the wicked Moth into Flame. Kind of a mix of the Death Magnetic stuff with more Load era sounding material like Now That We're Dead, Here Comes Revenge, and Dream No More, except written better and with much better production. As such, though, I find this to be a little bit less consistent as the previous album. There's still not those tracks I would name as being bad overall. Mankind and I Am Savage come close, though. But then, of course, they close the whole thing on a very strong note with Spit Out the Bone.
Come unto me, and you will feel perfection. Come unto me, and dedicate.
Again, somebody please save these guys from themselves. Someone force them to make an album that's less than an hour. Critical feedback and editing are necessary to the creative process. Don't just vomit everything out and call it a day. That said, still pretty strong for their later output, so I'm also putting this one at B tier. And that brings us to 72 Seasons in 2023.
Anticipation, in domination, a sea of heartbeat is one you define.
The first single was Lux Eterna, and I was probably the only reactor on the internet who didn't really like it. That opening riff got me kind of pumped, but then the vocals come in with that more Load era style and turn it into a really generic boomer rock song. Not terrible, just really bland. They follow that up with Screaming Suicide, which was a bit heavier, and I liked it a little bit more, but man is it repetitive, and despite the positive message, as usual, the lyrics left something to be desired for me.
Welcome to this life, born into the fight, need to clean your dream.
Next up was If Darkness Had a Sun, and then the trend flipped, because this was the track that it seemed like most people disliked, but I dug the main hook and overall atmosphere. The main issue is that it's, again, more than twice as long as it needs to be, but still pretty solid. But the track that actually consistently worked for me was the title track. Like, it could still be shaved down a minute or so, but this is a really engaging composition that showcases the band really working together as a unit to deliver a jam that actually feels worthy as a radio single and works as a really hype way to open up the album.
Staring into black light.
Getting into the deeper cuts, Shadows Fall is another solid one with a bluesy earworm hook and foot-tapping beat that gets a little repetitious over these 6+ minutes, but also has a fun middle section, and I like the dual vocals going into the chorus. Sleepwalk My Life Away actually caught my attention instantly with its spotlight on the chunky bass, putting me in Pauly Gualtieri mode. Unfortunately, as soon as that intro ends, it instantly loses momentum as it clunkily transitions into one of their slower, more yowly Load-era tracks for 7 minutes.
Why?
Similar energy for the bluesy Crown of Barbed Wire, and mostly dull You Must Burn, although I do like that one descending riff and the spooky, doomy Black Sabbath atmosphere around the middle of that one. But Chasing Light brings some much needed energy around that point to pick things up again. Still more of a rocker, but it's got just enough of that old thrash energy to get me moving. And even though I could say similar things about Room of Mirrors, which makes me wish the entire song was as good as the last minute, and also Too Far Gone, but I do have to admit by that one I start responding to the chorus with,
Yes, you are.
and then we close with the 11+ minute Enamorado, which I was dreading, and the first half does get kind of annoying, but when those big chemist sounding guitar harmonies kick in, I was into it. I would love to hear a lot more songwriting in this more dynamic vein. And I'm telling y'all, if they just had someone to keep them in line, like cut 40 minutes, scale it back to 10 songs with runtimes closer to like 3.5 to 4 minutes, there's potentially a really great album in here. But as it stands, I'd pretty squarely put this one right between the Load Reload albums and Hardwired and Death Magnetic. Like, call it like a C+. Y'all check out even more discussion of these albums with me and Mad Mike for like an hour, including Lulu or this thrash metal ranking playlist here, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.